In a world buzzing with artificial intelligence, digital authorship, and questions about the soul of creativity, we pause tonight to return to a gentler time, when writing was done by hand, with ink on paper, and the human spirit was poured into every word. Before algorithms could write poetry, there was Murasaki Shikibu, one woman, writing in silence, behind palace walls in 11th century Japan. Her creation, the Tale of Genji, is now considered the world's first novel. But who was she? What was her life like beyond the brush and scroll? Tonight, as the world rushes forward, let us drift back to the life of a woman who wrote without recognition, without freedom, but with elegance and depth that transcends centuries. Close your eyes. Let the hush of history carry you. This is the quiet story of Murasaki Shikibu. Hey guys, tonight we begin beneath paper lanterns that sway in the soft Kyoto breeze. You can almost hear the tap of Geta sandals on wet stone, the distant chanting of monks fading behind a garden wall. The streets here don't bustle, they murmur. Candles flicker behind bamboo blinds. And somewhere, a young girl, barely more than a shadow in her own home, watches this all, taking notes. It's the year 978. You crouch beside her on the polished floor of a noble house in Heian-era, future Kyoto. The scent of ink and incense weaves together with the gentle rustle of silk sleeves. Murasaki's real name is unknown to us, just a woman born into the Fujiwara clan, tucked quietly behind the grandeur of a world ruled by men in tall lacquered hats. Tonight, she's maybe 4 or 5 years old. Her mother is already gone, most likely dead when Murasaki was tiny, if not at childbirth. That's a pattern you'll see a lot in this story. Women slip in and out of the record like mist. But Murasaki? She's unusually present, for someone technically invisible. You watch her, this small girl, walking softly past the tatami mats toward the edge of the veranda. Outside, fireflies blink like floating punctuation. And inside, the house hums with the low voices of scholars and courtiers. Her father is among them, Fujiwara no Tamatoki, a minor aristocrat and scholar deeply steeped in Chinese literature. He probably doesn't realize she's listening. Or maybe he does and says nothing, because what would it matter? Girls aren't supposed to study Chinese. That's a man's domain, like court debates or poetry contests. Women are expected to master kana, the flowing syllabary for writing letters, poems, and diary musings. But not kanbun, the classical Chinese script of government and philosophy. And definitely not the Zhuozhuan or the Analects of Confucius, which Murasaki quietly memorizes when no one is watching. One night, her father is overheard muttering something half proud, half regretful. What a pity she's not a boy. A French tidbit, maybe apocryphal, but it sticks in your mind like a folded corner of a page. Historians still argue whether this was actual praise or just a wistful sigh, but you can't unhear it once it's said. You duck into the study where the real magic happens. It's dim and still, save for the gentle scratching of ink brushes. Scrolls are everywhere, rolled up on lacquer shelves, unfurling like long thoughts across the floor. Murasaki sneaks in sometimes. She presses her cheek to the mat, lips moving silently as she deciphers each vertical line. You trail your fingers across the same parchment, the fibers rough and real. Now imagine this, your entire culture tells you that you don't belong here, but you're here anyway. It's like showing up at an all-boys chess tournament and winning, except you're not even allowed to sit at the board. So you just memorize every move in secret. And the game? Oh, it's just beginning. Murasaki's world is ornamental on the surface, full of crimson screens and seasonal poems pinned to plum trees, but underneath, it's a sharp maze of rank, marriage alliances, and carefully coded behavior. If you speak too boldly, you're crass. If you're too quiet, you're forgettable. There's a perfect pitch for being noticed just enough, but never too much. You walk with her to the edge of a garden pond, still and moonlit. She picks up a brush from a nearby stone table, she's maybe 10 now, and dips it in the inkstone. Her first lines are probably practice. The moon reflects, but says nothing. Something safe. Something lovely. But inside, there's already more. She's watching people. Listening to their tics, their cruelties, their sighs. This isn't a diary. It's reconnaissance. You float forward a few more years. Now she's nearly of marriageable age, which means what, 13? 14? And you can feel her brace for the next chapter. The way her footsteps slow in the hallway. The way she lingers a moment longer near her father's study, as if to press all this ink and thought deep into her bones. She's a girl who reads everything but says almost nothing. A quiet observer in a court of loud performance. And honestly, you already know she won't survive this world unchanged. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. I'm always amazed how far these stories drift. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Time passes softly in Heian-era. The city, though modest in size compared to later metropolises, feels like a floating world, carefully arranged gardens, painted screens, and courtiers who speak in allusions rather than direct words. Everything is filtered through poetry and formality. A glance can mean affection. A pause can end a career. It's a time when beauty is measured by how well you suffer in silence, how elegantly you phrase a sorrow, how delicately you tread through the world without disturbing it. And that's where we find Murasaki again. She's now a young woman. Married. Or placed, really. We don't know much about the marriage. Most historians agree she wed a distant relative, Fujiwara no Nobutaka, much older than her, and possibly already with another wife. Again, the records are vague. But one thing is clear, she had a daughter. And then her husband died. Imagine that, still in your early 20s, already widowed, already a mother, and quietly brilliant with no one to talk to. That quiet deepens. You find her again in the northern provinces, away from court, away from the rituals and performances of aristocratic life. Maybe she's sitting by a paper window with her daughter on her lap, writing by candlelight while the snow folds over the eaves outside. It's here, some say, that she begins the first lines of what would become the Tale of Genji. A sprawling, poetic, psychological novel written entirely in Japanese kana script, not the lofty Chinese expected of great literature. She's not writing for scholars. She's writing for women. And that's revolutionary. Imagine a world where women were told that they didn't belong in serious literature, and then a woman writes the serious literature. Not a collection of poems. Not a diary. A novel. One that would ripple through centuries and inspire the entire genre. But this is no fairy tale. When she returns to the capital, the court is changed. The Empress Shoshi, daughter of the most powerful man in Japan, Fujiwara no Michinaga, is assembling a salon of ladies-in-waiting. Not for idle gossip, but for beauty, poetry, and prestige. These women will reflect her intellect, her taste, her radiance. They'll whisper behind fans and compose couplets at the drop of a hairpin. And she wants Murasaki. And here, the silence of Murasaki's early life suddenly echoes across polished palace floors. She's summoned to court, not as a noble, but as a woman with a gift too strong to be ignored. You walk beside her down the lacquered halls of the imperial palace. Lanterns flicker. Perfumed sleeves trail like waves. Courtiers tilt their heads in subtle acknowledgement. And inside her mind, she's watching everything. Inside the women's quarters, called the Kokyu, Murasaki becomes both participant and observer. The world here is layered like brocade. Emotions must be veiled, envy must wear perfume, and cleverness must never show its edge. It's here she meets the other literary giants of her day, Sei Shanagan, the sharp-tongued author of the Pillow Book, and Izumi Shikibu, a poet with a scandalous past and verses that burned like incense in the dark. Did they admire each other? Did they compete? We'll never know. Murasaki rarely mentioned them. In fact, she barely mentioned herself. Her diary, yes, she wrote one, reads more like a hesitant whisper than a bold chronicle. In it, she confesses self-doubt, annoyance at the gossip of court life, and worry over her own worth. At one point, she even writes that she feels utterly out of place. But still, she writes. She writes when the moon is low and the palace is quiet. She writes when others sleep. She writes while women braid their hair and murmur about court rumors. She writes in a hand so delicate that her scrolls are said to feel like threads of silk unrolling between the fingers. And what she creates is Genji. Hikaru Genji, the Shining Prince. A man of impossible beauty, complicated love affairs, and inner torment. Through his life, Murasaki paints the court world in all its glittering flaws, desire, loneliness, impermanence. But make no mistake, this is no soap opera. Genji isn't a hero. He's a mirror. Sometimes gentle, sometimes selfish. Sometimes noble, sometimes cruel. Through him, Murasaki tells the emotional truth of a world that pretended it had none. And that's her genius. She doesn't lecture. She reveals. Page by page, scene by scene. A glance through a beaded curtain. The way wind catches a letter. The subtle ache of absence. You float with her through those chapters. You feel the quiet despair of lovers bound by duty. The breathless hope of new romance. The sadness of time passing like cherry blossoms falling in the dark. She captures it all. With no loud declarations. Just brush on paper. And she does this while knowing her work may never outlast her own life. So tonight, as your eyes grow heavy and the world softens around the edges, remember her. A woman who wrote in the shadows. Who told a story no one expected to matter. Who gave us the world's first novel, not to impress, not to conquer, but to simply tell the truth of what it felt like to live, to love, to lose. The candle beside her desk flickers. The scroll curls slightly at the edge. And Murasaki writes one more line. Because even in silence, she has something to say. It is sometime in the early 1000s now. You're back in Heian-era, the imperial capital. The seasons change quietly here. Cherry blossoms drift like memory in spring. Crickets whisper through the night in summer. The wind rustles golden leaves in fall, and snow folds the rooftops into stillness in winter. Time doesn't march forward, it settles, layer by layer, like silk robes on the shoulders of a court lady. And somewhere in the palace, Murasaki is still writing. The tale of Genji grows not in one breath, but slowly, chapter by chapter. Each scroll might take weeks. Each passage is weighed, revised, rewritten. Ink is precious. So is time. So is secrecy. Because even as Murasaki rises in influence, her position is delicate. She's still a woman, still technically a servant of the court, and still under the shadow of powerful men. Most of all, she serves the Empress Shoshi. Shoshi herself is young, intelligent, but navigating a world of dynastic ambition. Her father, Fujiwara no Michinaga, arguably the most powerful man in Japan at the time, has placed her in the palace to solidify the Fujiwara clan's control. Her marriage to the emperor is more political maneuver than romance. But Shoshi finds in Murasaki a rare kindred spirit, someone who observes more than she speaks. And Murasaki? She's there, just behind the silk screens. She teaches Shoshi how to write, how to compose poetry. She reads to her. She listens. She watches. In the quiet chambers of the imperial residence, court ladies sit in a circle. They murmur over verses. They braid each other's hair. They compose riddles of longing in only 17 syllables. These are not idle games, they're the currency of emotional power. A well-placed poem can alter a courtier's fate. A misplaced word can cause scandal. And through it all, Murasaki records the soul of the time. Sometimes she sits Genji by the riverbank, watching the water pass. Sometimes she writes of a woman mourning her child. Sometimes she simply writes about the way a letter feels in the hand, its folds still warm from the sender's touch. She gives emotional weight to the smallest details. A flickering lamp. The pattern on a fan. The color of someone's robe at sunset. These are the brushstrokes of her narrative, and together they form something unlike anything the world had seen. A psychological novel. A world not driven by war or conquest, but by love, memory, and regret. And here's the part that might surprise you. The Tale of Genji is not just a romance. It's a meditation on impermanence. Over 54 chapters, Genji rises, falls, and eventually disappears from the story altogether. What remains is his legacy. Echoes of his life and the actions and sorrows of those who knew him. The novel ends not with triumph, but with absence. With silence. With the feeling that everything beautiful must fade. That's the essence of Mono no Aware. A core aesthetic of the Heian era. It means the pathos of things. A kind of gentle sadness. An awareness of beauty in the moment because it will pass. And Murasaki captures this like no one else. But now, step away from the scroll. Step into her shoes. You've created a work of genius. You've whispered a revolution into the fabric of court life. And still, what is left for you? Not applause. Not a book tour. Not wealth. We don't know what happens next with certainty. Her diary stops. The records fall silent. Some say she died not long after finishing Genji, maybe around 1014 or 1016. Others think she lived a little longer, quietly, in a world that quickly moved on to other concerns. No statues were built. No great tombs. No epic poems in her name. And yet, the tale of Genji survives. It is copied, recited, performed, illustrated. For centuries, artists return to its scenes again and again. Genji watching a lover leave at dawn. A moonlit garden. A lonely child staring out at falling rain. Even now, a millennium later, the book is still read. Still studied. Still loved. And tonight, as you lie in the soft quiet before sleep, consider this. Murasaki wrote at a time when women were expected to remain unseen. She wrote in a script considered informal. She wrote stories about feelings, about fragility, about longing. And in doing so, she became the mother of the modern novel. Not through loud declarations or sweeping battles, but through ink on paper. Through silence made visible. A woman in the year 1000 sat alone with a brush, and changed literature forever. No one expected her to speak. But she did. And now, across 10 centuries, she speaks still. So close your eyes now. Let the gentle sounds of Heian-kyo fade into the dark. The rustle of silk. The murmur of poems. The brush of wind against a paper screen. And somewhere, perhaps, Murasaki is still writing. By lamplight. By memory. By the soft ache of beauty too fragile to last. You are drifting now. And as your thoughts soften, you find yourself no longer in Japan at all. Instead, you floated west, far across the mountains and deserts of Asia, across plains and rivers, until you arrive in a place of stone and shadow. Ancient Mesopotamia. It is centuries before Murasaki ever picked up a brush. Even before Homer sang of war and wanderings. Even before paper. Here, stories are etched in clay. You are standing at the edge of a ziggurat in the city of Ur, around 2100 BCE. The air is thick with heat. Dust curls in the corners of your vision. Nearby, scribes sit hunched on low stools, gently pressing styluses into damp tablets. The symbols they make are wedge-shaped, cuneiform. The earliest known writing system. What are they recording? The affairs of kings. Tax records. Grain inventories. Names of gods. But sometimes, just sometimes, they write myths. One of them is telling the tale of Gilgamesh, a king too proud, too mighty, too human. A king who seeks immortality after the death of his beloved friend Enkidu. The Epic of Gilgamesh is not light reading. It is stormy, raw, full of grief. But like the Tale of Genji, it's driven by an emotional force. The realization that everything ends. Gilgamesh battles monsters. Defies the gods. Travels to the edge of the world. And still, he fails. There is no immortality. Not in flesh. But there is immortality in story. And so Gilgamesh returns home and orders the walls of his city to be engraved. His legacy becomes stone. Words become permanence. And across nearly 4,000 years, we still read his story today. The clay tablet. The silk scroll. The bound book. The glowing screen. Different forms. Same desire. To leave behind something that speaks. Now come back, not to Murasaki's world, not to Gilgamesh's, but to your own. Where stories live on in a different way. Today, you might share something on a phone. A memory. A message. A thought from the heart. You might whisper it to someone across a glowing screen. You might not think it matters. But it does. Every age has its form of storytelling. Every age has its writers. And sometimes, they are not kings. Sometimes, they are quiet women behind a screen of silk. Or nameless scribes with styluses of reed. Or someone like you, holding a pen, or a keyboard, or even just a thought in the dark. So let us pause here for a moment. Let your breath slow. Let the world fade. You are part of something vast. A human river of words. 1,000 years ago, someone wrote under candlelight. 1,000 years from now, someone may read what you've written. The story never truly ends. It is passed forward, softly, silently, endlessly. Now imagine this. In the stillness of Heian-era, Murasaki closes her inkstone. In ancient Ur, a scribe sits down his tablet. In your room, the light fades just a little more. And in all these places, at once, there is quiet. There is peace. There is story. Sleep now. You've walked with kings and poets. You've sat with ghosts and geniuses. You've wandered the hush between centuries. And you've heard what still echoes, across clay, silk, and time. The tale continues. But for tonight, let it rest. The room is still. You feel it, the soft pull of slumber. But the story carries on, drifting gently into the past again, like leaves on a stream of ink. Now you find yourself at the very heart of Heian, Japan. The year is somewhere between 990 and 1000 AD. The capital, Heian-era, gleams with autumnal golds and deep indigo blues. The air smells of pine and incense. Carpets of crimson maple leaves spill across temple steps. And in one quiet corner of this world, Murasaki Shikibu is being born. Of course, no one calls her Murasaki Shikibu yet. That's not her real name, anyway. Her birth name is lost to history, like so many women of her time. Murasaki is borrowed from her own fictional character in the Tale of Genji. And Shikibu? That's her father's court title, a bureaucratic label that stuck. Imagine if your name were Jessica Finance Department. Romantic, no? But back to her beginnings. She is born into the Fujiwara clan, the most powerful aristocratic family in Japan. They're not emperors, but they might as well be. They marry into the throne, pull strings from behind bamboo screens, and live lives of astonishing refinement. Murasaki's father, Fujiwara no Tamatoki, is a scholar and a court official. And unlike most men of the age, he sees that his daughter is brilliant. He teaches her Chinese, the sacred language of government and philosophy. This is shocking. Girls don't learn Chinese. In fact, they're actively discouraged from doing so. But Murasaki doesn't stop. She reads. She absorbs. She learns so quickly that her father is said to have sighed. Such a shame she's not a boy. Thanks, Dad. Still, he does not stop her. And so, Murasaki grows up steeped in poetry, Buddhist scripture, Confucian thought, and the lyrical court diaries of other women who dared to write. You can imagine her, can't you? A little girl, kneeling beside a lantern. Hair in sleek dark braids. Brush in hand. While other children chase fireflies in the twilight, she copies ancient poems onto scraps of silk paper. It's quiet work. But you sense her intensity. Even now, her mind never really rests. She's always watching. Listening. Memorizing. That's the thing about gifted children. They don't just learn fast. They feel deeply. And in Heian-kyo, feelings are currency. Everything here is measured in subtlety. Who bows the lowest, who wears the right seasonal colors, who can write the most aching farewell poem on a fan that might only be read once before being burned. Court life is a delicate dance of poetry, perfume, and politicking. And Murasaki, though still just a girl, is beginning to understand that words are not just decoration. They are weapons. They are masks. They are tools for survival. Historians still argue whether Murasaki's early education was encouraged or merely tolerated. But one thing is certain. Without that stolen education, there would be no Genji. And without Genji, the entire landscape of world literature would look very different. But we're not there yet. For now, she is still a girl, half hidden behind latticework, copying Chinese ideograms, listening to her father recite verses in the candlelit hush of their estate. She is watching the world. She is storing everything. And someday, she will use all of it. But not yet. Now, let's take a breath. The stars are out over Heian-kyo. Someone is playing the biwa, a kind of Japanese lute, its notes plucked like drops of water falling into a dark pond. Somewhere nearby, a poet sighs and dips her brush. And in your own quiet space, perhaps your breathing slows just a little. You are becoming part of this stillness, this preparation. You are witnessing the moment before the art. And that's worth honoring. For now, just be still. Let the girl study. Let the leaves fall. The story is waiting. By now, you're resting deeper. Eyes closed, breath soft. But still drifting forward, quietly, into the life of a girl who will one day write the world's first novel. She's growing up fast. Not in age, perhaps, but in understanding. In Heian, Japan, childhood doesn't stretch on the way it does today. You're expected to know your place, read a room, compose a poem about moonlight on a river, all before your 12th birthday. And somewhere between those delicate expectations and the shadows behind your screen, Murasaki becomes a woman. The records are vague, but we know this much. She marries young. Her husband's name is Fujiwara no Nobutaka, an official at court. They have a daughter, Kincher. And then, in a twist that feels almost too symbolic, he dies. Historians still argue whether this loss pushed her into writing. Did grief shape her art? Or was she already burning with ideas long before the widow's robes were sewn? You sit with that question now, as she likely did. A young mother, newly widowed. A quiet home. Ink. Paper. And silence. A silence deep enough to hear her own mind. It's in this period of solitude, somewhere between heartbreak and domestic obligation, that Murasaki begins crafting something extraordinary. Not poems. Not diaries. Not just letters or religious verse. But narrative. She begins to write the story of a man named Genji. Now, Genji is not your average noble. He's dazzlingly handsome. Emotionally complicated. Haunted by his station as the son of an emperor but barred from succession. He flits through love affairs, court intrigues, and spiritual epiphanies like someone trying to fill a hole that keeps widening beneath his feet. And yes, that might sound familiar. Because Genji is, in some ways, everyone. And in others, he's clearly a mirror of Murasaki herself, navigating a world where appearances rule, and emotions must be coded in 31 syllables or less. You picture her writing it by lamplight. In the same ink used for imperial records. On paper scented with plum blossoms. Alone, and yet not alone, surrounded by imagined lovers, ladies-in-waiting, ghosts, and glimpses of enlightenment. The tale of Genji begins not with an explosion, but a whisper. It unfurls slowly, like silk being unrolled across the floor. And still, she keeps writing. No one asks her to. There's no contract, no fanfare. No TikTok day in the life vlog to document her routine. Just page after page, until the world of Genji is as rich and real as the one outside her window. She writes because she must. Because something inside her won't be quiet. You know that feeling, don't you? That tug to create something no one asked for. To put thoughts into form, even if no one ever reads them. It's not ambition. It's devotion. That's what makes this moment so human. So intimate. So quietly revolutionary. A woman, alone, writing fiction, in an age when fiction wasn't even a recognized form. We're not talking about myths or religious parables. We're talking about interior lives, emotional nuance, ambiguity. Things that didn't belong to women, supposedly. And yet, here they are. On every page of Genji, you can feel her watching. Not just her characters, but the world. She's recording its poetry and hypocrisy, its rituals and emotional dissonance. She sees everything. And you, dozing there, just slightly, are seeing her. It's a strange kind of time travel. You, lying in a dark room in the 21st century. She, sitting with a brush in the 11th. Both part of the same long exhale of art. You wonder how many pages she's written by now. 10? 50? 100? No one's counting yet. Even Murasaki doesn't know she's inventing the novel. She's just writing. Still, word gets out. Her writing begins to circulate. Quietly, in aristocratic circles, like a shared secret. People are astonished, not just by the scope, but by the insight. The court has never seen anything like it. A fictional world so layered it feels real. Remember, this is a time before printing presses. Each copy of Genji must be painstakingly handwritten, one by one. And yet, it spreads. Ladies-in-waiting pass it around like contraband. Even Empress Shoshi hears about it. You can imagine the moment Murasaki's summoned to court. One quiet knock at the door changes everything. No longer just a widow with ink-stained fingers. She's about to step into the heart of power. But that's for next time. For now, listen to the brush strokes. Let your mind settle next to hers. She's not done yet. And neither are you. Now, you're back in motion, floating quietly, like incense in a closed room. Murasaki Shikibu, once scribbling in private corners, is now being watched. Word of her talent has reached the imperial palace. And the court doesn't ignore talent. It absorbs it. The summons comes, gentle, formal, impossible to refuse. You glide with her across the palace grounds. The air is heavy with pine resin and the faint breath of chrysanthemums. Slippers on polished floors, layers of robes rustling like reeds in a pond. You feel both her excitement and her dread. Murasaki is appointed as a lady-in-waiting to Empress Shoshi. This is not a reward, exactly. It's more like conscription with ribbons. To be clear, life at court is not one endless poetry contest and moon-viewing party. It's politics with perfume. She enters a world where everyone smiles, and no one means it. Where the wrong word can ruin a family. And knowing too much is dangerous. But knowing too little is worse. Historians still argue whether Murasaki was eager to serve or secretly horrified. Her diary hints at both. She writes of feeling isolated, unfit for the pageantry, troubled by the frivolity around her. And yet, she stays. She watches. She listens. She writes. You settle deeper into your pillow as she moves through silken corridors. Think of it like a high school with better fashion and a much stricter dress code. Everyone's ranking everyone else. Your handwriting, your choice of incense, your timing at poetry contests, it all matters. And here's the kicker, women wield power through subtlety. There are no speeches or swords. No battles for territory. Just ink. Expression. Grace under pressure. Murasaki begins mentoring Empress Shoshi, teaching her to write with elegance, to appreciate the classics, to shape her public image with subtle force. And in return, Shoshi offers protection. A rare kind of freedom, within the cage of court life. Here's where things get juicy. The tale of Genji continues to grow, not just in length, but in influence. It's now being read aloud at court gatherings, performed almost like theater. Imagine someone reading your diary to the most powerful people in the country. Now imagine they applaud. You'd think that would be validating. And maybe it is, for a moment. But envy grows in polished halls. Other courtiers begin mocking her, calling her too clever, too proud. As if intelligence were a fashion faux pas. There's even evidence that rival writers, like Sei Shanagon, author of the Pillow Book, viewed her with polite disdain. They orbited the same sun, but burned in different ways. Murasaki, introspective and melancholic. Sei, witty and sharp-tongued. Historians still debate whether they ever met. But in your mind, you picture them nodding across a garden path. Each silently judging the other's sleeves. And yet Murasaki endures. Not just survives, but thrives, in her quiet way. Because here's the twist, she's not just chronicling the world. She's shaping it. Every chapter of Genji deepens court discussions. People see themselves in the characters, too much, sometimes. There are whispers that she's mocking certain nobles under the veil of fiction. And she probably is. You lie there now, half asleep, picturing her in a quiet corner of the palace. Writing by lamplight again. Only now, with guards outside her chamber. With silk paper, fine brushes, the hum of court life just beyond the screen. She's composing scenes that feel impossibly modern. Unrequited love, moral ambiguity, trauma passed down through generations. You almost forget this was written 1,000 years ago. That's the magic. The Tale of Genji isn't about grand battles or divine prophecy. It's about people being people, flawed, tender, jealous, hopeful. And here's your French tidbit. At one point, Murasaki writes a scene so emotionally complex that scholars believe it documents the first literary use of stream-of-consciousness narrative. Yes, before Woolf, before Joyce, there was Murasaki. And you? You're floating now, half inside the novel. Not quite awake, not quite dreaming. You can feel the weight of brocade robes. The warmth of autumn sun filtering through bamboo blinds. The aching silence between written lines. Because even with status, she's still a woman alone in a room, creating a world to make sense of her own. And perhaps you feel that too. That need to build something. To capture a feeling before it vanishes. To be seen, even if anonymously. Tonight, you're not watching history from the outside. You're living it, slowly. And as her quill lifts once more, you fall a little further, into the hush between chapters. You're adrift now, somewhere between paper lantern light and dream. Murasaki Shikibu continues to write, not just pages but worlds. And court life, once so foreign, has become her strange, familiar stage. You feel her shift into a rhythm. Wake, observe, teach, write. Repeat. But beneath this routine, there's something stirring. She begins to notice cracks in the lacquer of the palace. Politics swirl louder now. Emperor Chijo has passed, and Empress Shoshi's status begins to wobble. The Fujiwara clan's grip on power feels less eternal than it once did. Murasaki watches quietly. She's not a politician, but she's no fool. She senses how favor is fleeting, how alliances are whispered, and how even the most elegant poem can be used as a dagger. Historians still argue whether her later chapters of Genji reflect these tensions, or if they are simply the evolution of an author growing older, more introspective. Either way, the tone of her writing begins to shift. You feel it, too. There's a weight to her later passages, a sadness, a kind of soft despair. Genji himself dies, though not on the page. He simply vanishes, leaving a void where he once glimmered. And then Murasaki does something wild for her time. She continues the story. But now, the focus moves to Genji's descendants, his son, his grandson. New characters struggle with identity, with love, with the legacy of a man they barely knew. It's like watching a sequel that's better than the original, but also lonelier. There's no more glittering romance. No more perfect moonlit evenings. Instead, the writing becomes spiritual, philosophical, quietly devastating. You, tucked under your blanket, begin to feel the shift in your own body. Your breath deepens. The noise of the day dissolves, like ink dropped in warm water. And here comes your quirky tidbit. Murasaki writes about a fictional temple so vividly, its corridors, its gardens, its eerie silence, that for centuries, scholars assumed it was real. It wasn't. She imagined it. And yet that fictional temple became a real location later, built by fans of Genji trying to walk inside her world. Let that settle in. Her imagination altered the physical geography of Japan. Now that's power. But don't worry, no temples are being built in your name just yet. You're still lying down, warm and drowsy, listening to the scratch of her brush echo across time. And then there's the court's response. More nobles start copying her chapters. Genji scrolls become a form of currency among the elite. People host reading parties. Imagine book club, but every guest is judging your calligraphy and your incense blend. There's even a rumor that one powerful minister used Genji as a kind of dating manual for his sons. You smirk. Because that's not a great idea. Genji, after all, is deeply flawed. Handsome? Yes. Charming? Absolutely. A walking red flag? Without question. Still, the story's emotional depth continues to captivate readers. And you, curled up in the present, realize something extraordinary. This woman, writing behind screens, with no formal recognition, she's creating the blueprint for modern fiction. Character development, internal conflict, emotional realism, all seated in her scrolls. Historians still debate how much of Genji was personal. Was it a mirror? A mask? A mix? Some argue Genji was an idealized version of the courtmen she never found. Others believe he's a stand-in for the dangers of beauty without substance. But to you, half asleep, it doesn't matter. You just feel the gentle ache of her voice, reaching through the centuries. Soft, steady, wise. Because here's the truth she knew, and now you do too. Writing isn't just recording life. It's surviving it. It's reshaping pain into elegance, boredom into intrigue, loneliness into something sacred. She lived in a time when women weren't supposed to leave a legacy. And yet, here we are. You, in your bed. She, on your screen. Separated by oceans of time and yet completely entangled. As your limbs go heavy and your breath slows, you hear the faintest sound, like brush against paper. That's her, still writing. Still imagining. Still whispering. And you? You are finally quiet enough to listen. You drift now into the middle years, hers, and perhaps yours. The moon has shifted position, lower now, outside your window. You don't move. You just breathe, and follow Murasaki Shikibu deeper into the folds of her twilight. This is when her world grows smaller. Her fame grows larger. A strange equation. You know that paradox, don't you? When your own voice echoes farthest just as you're speaking less? That's her now. The scrolls of Genji circulate so widely that even monks in distant temples begin to quote her lines in sermons. They praise her insight into human nature, and scold her for its temptations. Oh yes, the clergy has opinions. Some call the Tale of Genji a work of exquisite poison. They say its beauty distracts from the path of enlightenment. One famous priest allegedly burned his copy after weeping from its pages. Still, even they can't stay away. There's your mainstream historical fact. By the 12th century, Genji was being read in monasteries, even by those who condemned it. And meanwhile, the court? More interested than ever. Nobles beg for new chapters. Some even send subtle gifts, paper, incense, silk sleeves, as bribes for a glimpse of the next scroll. Murasaki, now older, is both amused and weary. She never intended to become a celebrity. Historians still argue whether she continued writing willingly, or felt pressured to maintain the story's pace. What's clear is this. She retreats further into herself. She writes fewer letters. Stops attending many ceremonies. And when she does appear, people hush around her. As though she were a prophet, or worse, a legend still alive. You feel that too, the loneliness of being seen, but not known. She begins to pour her doubts into Genji's later generations. Her characters falter. They speak of longing for meaning, of lives lived in shadow, of trying to find peace and beauty that always slips away. You shift under the covers. Because it hits a little close, doesn't it? It's that odd ache we all carry. Wanting to be understood, but terrified of being seen too clearly. You sense her conflict, rippling across time like a soft, sad melody. Still, she keeps writing. And in her final chapters, she introduces one of the most fascinating figures. Yukifune. A young woman caught between two lovers, torn by expectation, and eventually, she disappears. Literally. She throws herself into a river to escape her life, but doesn't die. Instead, she survives and joins a convent, renouncing the world altogether. Quirky tidbit time. Yukafune's river scene is one of the earliest fictional suicide attempts in literature, and scholars still debate whether it was inspired by a real court scandal or pure invention. Murasaki never tells us what truly happens to her. Yukafune vanishes into the mist of ink, and the tale, quietly, ends. No grand finale. No weddings. No moral victory. Just silence. And that, more than any dramatic plot twist, feels real. Because life, as you know too well, doesn't always close the curtain for you. Sometimes the story just fades, and you're left with echoes. You settle deeper now. Sheets warm, spine relaxed. Murasaki's writing slows, and your heartbeat sinks with the hush of her brush. She has become a woman made of parchment. Her legacy longer than her life. We don't know exactly when she dies. There are no records. Just a quiet vanishing, like her characters. One moment she's at court, then, gone. It's fitting, somehow. The woman who gave voice to so many leaves without her own final word. But don't feel sad. She wouldn't want that. She'd want you to think, to reflect, to ask, what do I leave behind? Not in fame or fans, but in emotion, in moments, in meaning. And here's something to carry with you into sleep. The ink Murasaki used? Made from soot and pine resin. It lasted for centuries. Her words, written in candlelight, still exist. Not digitally preserved. Not artificially enhanced. Just preserved by love. By readers who cared. By people like you. So you inhale. Exhale. And imagine that same ink pressed into parchment. That same brush whispering its way across the scroll. Her hand moves. Your breath follows. The story continues. You breathe in again, slower this time. It's late. The kind of late that makes the ceiling blur and the edges of the world soften. But you're not done drifting yet. Because now we move beyond the woman. Into the shadow her story left behind. Murasaki Shikibu, though long gone, is not forgotten. Her name endures, written in schoolbooks, etched on statues, whispered through time. But how? She lived in an era that barely acknowledged women's names, let alone their legacies. And yet, hers remains. That's your mainstream historical fact tonight. Murasaki Shikibu is one of the only women from the Heian period whose full name, though technically a pseudonym, has survived in near-universal recognition across a millennium. Remember, Murasaki wasn't her birth name. It's a nickname, drawn from one of her characters, Lady Murasaki from the Tale of Genji. And Shikibu? That's her father's job title at court. So in essence, her name is Purple Girl from the Bureau of Ceremonial Affairs. Catchy. But that's how women were labeled then. By men, by their fathers, by their creations. Still, against all odds, her voice outlived the silence that tried to contain it. You shift a little. The covers rustle like old scrolls, and you imagine being a monk in the 13th century. Carefully copying out the Tale of Genji onto fresh paper. That's right, long before printing presses, the book survived purely through hand transcription. One tired scholar, one brushstroke at a time. Each copy took months to complete. Sometimes a year. Some included illustrations, delicate ones, with swirling robes and misty trees. Others were just ink and patience. And here's a quirky tidbit. In the 14th century, a noblewoman actually made her daughter write out the entire Tale of Genji by hand as a form of moral training. Better than a summer job, I guess. But even more intriguing? Historians still argue whether Murasaki intended for Genji to be read by the masses, or whether it was a private courtly diversion that escaped into the wild. Some believe she'd be horrified to know schoolchildren now study her like a dusty relic. Others say, no, she'd be proud. After all, what writer doesn't hope their words echo past the final page? The truth? We'll never know. Because after Murasaki's death, her diary stops. Her letters fade. And the Genji manuscript becomes something else entirely. A cultural artifact. By the Edo period, 1603 to 1868, the Tale of Genji was considered the standard of Japanese classical literature. Samurai read it. Emperors praised it. Even foreign scholars, once Japan opened its borders, were baffled by its depth. One American historian in the early 1900s wrote, "It reads like a modern psychological novel." Yes. 900 years before Freud, and Murasaki was already analyzing desire and identity through fictional lens. You admire that. Quietly. As you stare at your ceiling. She never studied psychology. But she understood longing. She understood jealousy. She understood how the soul craves what it cannot keep. And that made her timeless. Even now, artists reference her. Anime creators echo her story arcs. Modern writers reinterpret her scenes. There's even a Murasaki Shikibu Prize, awarded annually to women authors in Japan who embody her spirit of quiet brilliance. Imagine being that deeply sewn into the fabric of culture. Imagine whispering through centuries, through war, through empire, through electricity and Wi-Fi and TikTok dances. Murasaki never heard of any of those. But her words outlived them all. That's your moment of awe tonight. Not the drama of the tale, but the persistence of ink. You picture the scrolls again. Fragile. Brown-edged. Crackling at the seams. Yet somehow, intact. One of the oldest surviving scrolls of Genji, the Aobai-Oshiban, dates back to the 12th century and contains both text and paintings. It's housed in Japan's National Treasure Collection, under special light and humidity controls. Because paper this old can disintegrate just from breath. That's how fragile legacy is. It can be erased by sunlight. Or preserved by care. And here you are, centuries away. Cradling her life like a soft thought. As you edge closer to sleep. You wonder, what would she think of you? Someone not royal, not noble. Just lying in bed. Listening to the echo of her brush. You think maybe she'd smile. Not for the fame, but for the connection. You, across oceans and centuries. Still feeling what she felt. As she crouched in her robes. Ink staining her sleeves. Trying to make sense of the human heart. You close your eyes for a moment. Let that image stay. The flickering oil lamp. The steady scratch of brush on parchment. A woman writing herself into immortality. Without even trying. There's something so peaceful about that. So quiet. You're almost there. Your breath is quieter now. Barely stirring the stillness around you. But tonight's journey continues, not through pages, but through the ripple effect of one quiet voice. Because Murasaki's story doesn't end when her brush dries. It begins again, each time someone picks up her tale. Each time someone whispers her name in a different tongue. You turn on your side. It's a small movement. But in the hush of midnight, it feels like the shifting of worlds. Tonight, you explore how the tale of Genji escaped the confines of Heian-era Japan, how it traveled, transformed, and took root in places Murasaki never dreamed of. Here's your mainstream historical fact to start. The Tale of Genji was first translated into English in the early 20th century. A monumental feat considering its length, complexity, and cultural specificity. The translator? Arthur Waley, a British scholar who became so obsessed with Genji. He dedicated decades of his life to rendering it for Western audiences. He didn't just translate words. He interpreted poetry, emotional nuance, and aesthetic codes foreign to most of his readers. And yet, people read it. People adored it. By 1935, the Tale of Genji was being discussed in literary circles across Europe. James Joyce was aware of it. Virginia Woolf likely flipped through it. You smirk in the dark. Imagine trying to explain Genji to a Bloomsbury tea party. There's a lot of incense and moonlight. Oh, and he marries his stepmother. Yes, things get ethically murky. But that's the nature of historical fiction. Especially fiction written by a woman navigating her own silence. Back then, noble women didn't write for prestige. They wrote to survive. To express what they couldn't say aloud. And Murasaki said it all, through metaphor, through verse, through story. Now, here's your quirky tidbit. In 2008, the Tale of Genji was turned into a manga. Not just one, actually, multiple. Each with its own artistic spin. Some are ethereal, with swirling robes and pale, melancholy faces. Others are playful, almost soap opera-esque, reimagining Genji as a brooding heartthrob. Even Hello Kitty once did a mini Genji parody. Let that sink in. Murasaki's 1,000-year-old masterpiece. Filtered through Sanrio merch. Bet she didn't see that coming. And yet, it works. Because at its heart, Genji isn't about old court politics. It's about longing. Loss. Trying to hold onto beauty in a world that slips constantly through your fingers. That's timeless. Which brings you to an open scholarly debate. Did Murasaki write Genji as social critique, or escapist fantasy? Some scholars argue it was her quiet rebellion. A mirror held up to the absurdity of court life. Mocking its rituals, exposing its cruelty. Others say, no. It was romanticism. A way to weave her own sorrow into something elegant. Both may be true. Because human motivation doesn't come in neat little boxes. Especially not when it's filtered through poetry and longing. You let that thought drift with you. Poetry and longing. They're stitched into everything. The pillows beneath your head. The music in your dreams. Even this script, whispering gently as you sink deeper into sleep. And Genji? He lives on, too. There's a hotel in Kyoto where you can sleep in a room styled after Genji's palace. Silk screens. Tatami mats. Soft lantern glow. You can order wagashi sweets named after each of his lovers. It's tourism, yes. But also tribute. Tribute to the quiet girl who scribbled behind a bamboo curtain. Never knowing that emperors and schoolgirls and YouTubers would one day quote her lines. Even in politics, her influence lingers. During World War II, the Tale of Genji was used as proof of Japan's deep cultural heritage. It became a symbol, not just of femininity, but of endurance. One woman. One story. 1,000 years. You close your eyes again. Feel the ache behind that. The beauty of something surviving, not because it shouts, but because it whispers exactly what you needed to hear. You imagine Murasaki now. Not at her desk, but standing alone beneath a cherry tree in bloom. The blossoms are falling like snow. She's not writing, just watching. Because sometimes, after telling the world's first novel, you need silence. And tonight, you share that silence with her. Side by side, across time. Your body has grown heavier now, anchored by stillness. Only your thoughts continue to wander, slow, dreamlike, like ink diffusing in water. But we're not done drifting yet. Because tonight, you continue tracing the ripple of one woman's words. Not just through time or translation, but through the hearts of readers who never knew her name. You're entering the world of Murasaki Shikibu's afterlife. Not the spiritual kind, but her literary one. And here's your mainstream historical fact. Murasaki Shikibu became a character in literature long after her death. In medieval Japanese plays and scrolls, she wasn't just a scribe. She became a myth, a ghost, a muse, a symbol of unspoken longing. No plays imagined her walking temple grounds, haunted by her own writing. Priests composed prayers in her name. Centuries later, novelists in Meiji-era Japan fictionalized her inner life, turning her into a symbol of a true Japanese woman, modest, brilliant, tragic, and yes, slightly exaggerated. You turn your head slightly on the pillow. Isn't that always the way? A woman quietly changes history, and the world reinterprets her. Sometimes reverently, sometimes wildly wrong. Which brings us to your quirky tidbit of the night. In 2001, Murasaki Shikibu was chosen as the face of Japan's 2,000 yen banknote. Yes, currency. Right next to Shurimen Gate in Okinawa. You'll find her seated calmly, brush in hand, her gaze timeless. Only a few countries feature female writers on their money. Fewer still feature women who published anonymously, in ink, in secret. And while the bill itself is rarely used in daily life, it remains a symbol, not of wealth, but of quiet worth. You smile, barely. Because that's fitting. Murasaki's life was about what endures when the noise fades. And yet, even now, historians still argue whether she actually completed the Tale of Genji. Some believe the last 10 chapters were written by someone else. Perhaps a contemporary or a court rival. The tone shifts. The pacing feels different. In those final sections, Genji himself dies. The story loses its prince, and a new generation takes over. Could that reflect Murasaki's personal grief? Or did someone else pick up her brush and finish the arc? The debate remains unresolved, like much of her life. But that uncertainty is part of her mystique. You breathe deeply. Uncertainty can be beautiful, after all. It leaves room for dreams. Speaking of dreams, have you ever heard of Genji Monogatari Amaki? It's an illustrated scroll from the 12th century, depicting scenes from the Tale of Genji, one of the oldest surviving visual narratives in the world. Delicate brushwork, soft hues, panels that seem to float more than they sit. The scrolls are so fragile. They're only shown to the public a few days per year, under carefully controlled light. And yet, when you finally see them, you feel the hush of 1,000 years resting on the paper. You feel her. Not Genji. Her. The woman who wrote moonlight into motion. Who made absence ache. Who turned social exile into lyrical art. You wonder, did she know how far her story would go? That it would one day be studied at Oxford, dramatized in anime, or whispered to sleepy strangers on a glowing screen? Probably not. But that's the magic of quiet history. It doesn't ask to be noticed. It waits. And when the world is finally still enough, it begins to speak. Softly. Clearly. Endlessly. You shift again. not from restlessness, but to let your mind wander just a little more. Murasaki never wrote a sequel. She didn't need to. Her words echoed far beyond their final page. Through monks and emperors. Through artists and scholars. Through you, tonight. And they'll keep echoing. As long as there's moonlight. As long as someone, somewhere, feels too much and says too little. Because in the end, that's what Murasaki gave the world. A place to put its longing. A mirror. Not for vanity, but for memory. You stare at the ceiling, half-lidded, and seeing flowers blooming in the dark. They drift down slowly, like petals on the wind. Each one a word she wrote. Each one carrying a piece of you with it. You don't reach for them. You don't need to. You're already part of the story. You stir gently. Not awake, just enough to notice that time has softened around you. The walls feel further away now, the blankets heavier, the silence deeper. And still, Murasaki Shikibu lingers, like a candle sent after the flame is gone. Where were we? Ah yes, right at the moment her legacy began to stretch beyond Japan's borders. You might assume that a 1,000-year-old novel written by a woman in an obscure court language would fade into the dusty archives of literary history. But no! You'd be wrong. The Tale of Genji did something extraordinary. It crossed oceans. Your mainstream historical fact for tonight, the first full English translation of the Tale of Genji appeared in 1925, by Arthur Waley, a British Orientalist who fell in love with Murasaki's prose. His version wasn't perfect. It was a bit loose with the text, heavy on Edwardian flair. But it opened the West's eyes to a world few had imagined, Heian Japan, full of floating sleeves, layered emotions, moonlit silences, and poetic longing. And once the gate opened, it didn't close. Later translations, more faithful and nuanced, arrived, Royal Tylers and Edward Sadenstickers among them. Each one revealing new layers, like kimono sleeves slipping open to reveal more color underneath. But here's the quirky tidbit. In 2008, the Tale of Genji was adapted into a Takarazuka revue musical in Japan. Yes. You heard right. An all-female, glitter-heavy, Broadway-style performance, with Genji himself played by a woman in shimmering violet robes. There was singing, dancing, sword twirls. Can you picture it? That elegant, poetic prince, once the lover of dozens, now tap-dancing under spotlights. Somewhere, you hope Murasaki would laugh. Historians still argue whether she would have approved of these modern retellings. Would she have cringed at Western reinterpretations of her deeply layered characters? Would she have embraced the spectacle? Or simply smiled, politely, behind her fan? You imagine her doing exactly that now, sitting quietly, amused, letting the world play with her legacy like a cat bats a scroll. But translation is a form of resurrection, isn't it? You're not just reading her words, you're giving them new breath. And breath matters more than ink. You blink slowly as a question drifts through you like steam. How did she do it? How did one woman, excluded from official education, confined by court rules, writing in a language considered inferior, compose a work that survived 1,000 years? You're not the only one asking. Feminist scholars have spent decades reclaiming her place in literary history. They argue that the Tale of Genji isn't just a romantic epic. It's a coded critique. A mirror of patriarchy. A quietly defiant map of the emotional interior lives of women. And whether or not Murasaki intended it that way, she lived it. She saw through the ceremonies. She observed the masks. And she wrote what happened behind them. As you lie there now, tucked in shadow, you realize, this story has become a map for you, too. Not one of roads or geography, but a feeling. Because sometimes you don't need to travel to wander. You just need the right guide. And tonight, Murasaki is yours. Her ink flows through your thoughts like a slow river, carrying you past judgment, past noise, past the brittle scaffolding of now. You float by scholars poring over Genji's dreams. You drift past museum cases holding fragments of 11th century paper. You glide by schoolchildren reciting her name like a prayer in Tokyo classrooms. And in each place, her presence lingers. Not loud, not glowing, not grand. Just there. Like breath on a mirror. Like moonlight on a scroll. Like the voice you're hearing now. You think about the women who came after her. Writing in notebooks hidden in laundry baskets. Scribbling poems in margins between tasks. Daring to be seen on paper when the world wanted them invisible. Murasaki Shikibu didn't start a movement. But she lit a candle. And you, lying here tonight, are watching its flame flicker still. You exhale slowly. Your breath joins hers. Because across centuries and syllables, across language and translation, one thing hasn't changed. The ache to be understood. You understand her now. Not just her words, but the quiet behind them. And somewhere in the hush between heartbeats, she understands you, too. You shift slightly beneath your blanket, not from discomfort, but because the stillness has deepened. That soft space between sleep and wakefulness stretches like silk, and Murasaki's voice, no longer a whisper from the past, now seems like a quiet part of your own thoughts. You're in the home stretch now, and oddly, it feels like leaving a temple just before sunrise. The air is still thick with incense and old stories. So, where does the legacy of a 1,000-year-old woman truly rest? Let's talk about echoes, how one person's work continues to ripple through culture, scholarship, and imagination long after their hands have gone still. Your mainstream historical fact, the Tale of Genji, is taught as essential reading in Japanese schools and is required study for students pursuing literature, history, and even philosophy. Some high schools in Japan dedicate entire semesters to dissecting the novel's themes, character arcs, and poetic form. Imagine being a teenager assigned to read not Shakespeare, but a 1,000-page novel written by a noblewoman in 11th century Japan, with 40-plus characters, dozens of core rituals, and emotional subtext so delicate it's like trying to taste the wind. Now here's your quirky tidbit. In 2001, Japan issued a special 2,000 yen banknote featuring Murasaki Shikibu's portrait. Yes, that's right, her face, rendered in soft lines and regal detail, floats beside an image of the Tale of Genji manuscript on real currency. Think about it, a woman who wrote in secret, possibly worried she might be mocked or dismissed, ends up on money. Not a warlord. Not a samurai. Not a businessman. A writer. Historians still argue whether Murasaki truly intended Genji to be read as a feminist statement or simply a vivid observation of the world she lived in. There are camps. Some scholars believe she was fully conscious of her subversive undertones. Others say she was merely reflecting court life with emotional honesty. You lie there and wonder, does it matter? Maybe not. Maybe the point isn't what she meant, but what she made possible. 1,000 years after her ink dried, you're lying in the dark, heart slowed, eyes softening, and she's still speaking. You drift further back, past Genji's 54 chapters and countless poetic digressions, to something more intimate, a woman sitting alone, brush in hand, quiet all around. You can almost feel it now. The wooden floor beneath her knees. The faint crackle of paper. The silent flicker of candlelight. A night not unlike this one. You imagine her writing while the world outside her door slept. Maybe the moonlight pulled at her side. Maybe she paused sometimes, listening to distant footsteps or the creak of sliding doors. Maybe she doubted. Maybe she held her brush above the page, frozen for minutes, thinking, does this matter? And then maybe she wrote anyway. And that is her greatest gift to you. Not the novel. Not the fame. Not the translations, banknotes, or footnotes. But the decision to create something in a world that might never care. You begin to realize something lovely now. Every time someone picks up her book, or whispers her name, or simply lies back and listens to her story, she breathes again. It's a quiet immortality. One she never asked for, but earned. And you? You're part of it. You're the one she was writing for. The quiet listener. The midnight reader. The soul who leans in, asking for a story, not because you need it, but because you feel more alive when you're near it. There's something sacred about that. The silence in your room feels warmer now. As if she's still here, not as a ghost or memory, but as company. And you're not quite ready to let her go. Not just yet. The story, like your breath, slows. You lie motionless now, but your mind drifts like a leaf on quiet water, still tethered to Murasaki Shikibu, even as the current of sleep pulls gently at your thoughts. This final stretch is soft, but not empty. It's the hush after a concert, the fading warmth of a poem whispered aloud, the moment the ink dries on a letter that will never be mailed. Let's consider what happened after Murasaki's final brushstroke. When she died, likely sometime in the early 11th century, there was no national mourning, no grand tomb, no marble statue. There were only her words, left like breadcrumbs through a forest of time. And yet somehow, she endured. Your mainstream historical fact, the Tale of Genji was hand-copied for centuries before the printing press even existed in Japan. Nobles commissioned illustrated scrolls, artists painted dreamlike scenes of Genji's romantic life, and poets quoted her lines as if they were scripture. Entire generations passed the tale from one calligrapher's hand to another, like monks preserving sacred text. Because in many ways, it was sacred. Now for your quirky tidbit. In Kyoto, there's a modest temple called Heian-era that claims to be where Murasaki began writing Genji. They even have an exhibit called the Genji Room, arranged like a Heian period writing chamber. Visitors leave offerings, pens, notebooks, haiku, and once, famously, a digital tablet with a half-finished screenplay saved to the home screen. History meets the present in unexpected ways. And historians? They still argue whether Murasaki finished the tale before she died. Some believe the last few chapters, darker, more somber, disconnected from the earlier romantic escapades, were either rushed or written by someone else. Others say no, those final pages reflect the hard-earned wisdom of a woman who had seen love shine in its shadow. Someone who had finally stopped writing for the court, and started writing for herself. You lie still and think about that. The idea of a woman slowly turning inward as she aged, no longer trying to please the palace or follow poetic trends. Just writing because it soothed something in her. Just writing because it was quiet. And in that stillness, you see the full picture. Murasaki wasn't a myth. She was a daughter, a widow, a mother. A woman caught in a moment of cultural brilliance and silent repression. A woman who bent the rules without breaking them, who whispered rebellion in poetry, who sketched emotional landscapes with gentler lines than any sword could cut. She made a world, layered, aching, real, and invited readers to live inside it. You included. So here, in this moment, wrapped in silence, held by shadows, you understand something vital. Stories don't end. They ripple. They settle. They wait. Until someone finds them again. Like now. Like you. And maybe, just maybe, someone will find your story someday. In an attic. On a dusty hard drive. Scribbled in the margins of a forgotten notebook. And maybe they'll feel what you feel now. The warmth of a voice across time. The comfort of knowing someone once saw the world the same strange way you do. The miracle of being heard, long after you thought your voice had faded. You close your eyes, finally. There is nothing more to say. But oh, how much has been felt. The night is still now. There's nothing but the low hum of your breath, the soft rustle of distant leaves outside your window, and the echo of ink strokes that faded 1,000 years ago. The story lingers, but it doesn't ask for your attention anymore. It simply exists beside you. A quiet companion in the room. You don't need to remember every detail. You don't need to understand all the poems or palace rituals or historical debates. You were here. You listened. You wandered through a world. And now you rest. Let your body sink deeper into your mattress. Let your fingers relax, your jaw go slack, your eyelids heavier with every slow blink. The weight of history is gone now. Only the softness remains. A softness shaped like cherry blossoms in candlelight. Like ink on silk. Like a name whispered at the edge of memory. You're safe. You're calm. You're part of the long, slow rhythm that connects every dreamer across centuries. Maybe Murasaki is dreaming too. Maybe in some eternal corner of Storyland, she knows you're listening. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Sleep now. Sleep deeply. Sleep gently. Sleep like someone who's heard the whole story, and knows they are not alone.